Hey, it's Liz DiAlto, and this is the Untamed the Wild Soul Woman podcast. From body image, sex, spirituality, money and relationships, to motherhood, creativity, business, communication, and desire, Untamed the Wild Soul Woman is the place to come for real stories and powerful advice to help you reclaim and redefine womanhood in the 21st century. Liz DiAlto here, creator of Wild Soul Movement and your host for the Untamed the Wild Soul Woman podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in today. We've got another Ask Liz episode, and I'm super excited about this because the other week we had a genius idea. We have a survey when people log in, or rather opt in, to our email list that people have been filling out for years, and I just haven't looked at it in the longest time. So we had hundreds and hundreds of responses to the surveys, and so my amazing operations genius, Natanya, who some of you have probably interacted with if you've ever sent us an email for any reason at hello@wildsoulmovement.com, pulled together a bunch of the responses and the questions that people had from those surveys. So we have tons of questions to answer for you. And in a lot of cases, many of them were very similar. So we've grouped them together. And today is the basically how to handle fear of all shapes, sizes, and forms episode. So I'm going to read off for you some of the questions that are going to be covered in this episode. And remember, these are meant to be shorter, so only 15 or 20 minutes to give you some really powerful nuggets on how you can take this advice and apply it and implement it in your life immediately and start to get results and start to experiencing things differently, right out of the gates. And it's really fun to be able to have this medium where I can do this with you and for you. So at any time, if you ever have a specific question that you would like us to cover in an Ask Liz episode, you can email those to hello@wildsoulmovement.com. And just a quick reminder, if you have not yet left a review for the show in iTunes and you've been listening and you've been enjoying it, by all means, please head in and do that. It just helps us reach more women with the message of reclaiming and redefining womanhood in the 21st century. So let me read off these questions for you. So these are around fear and limiting beliefs. So how do you get past the fear of not being good enough? How do I let go of the control of the outcome of things when I have so much fear? How do I move past a moment when I'm seized in fear? I often come from a place of fear almost as a protection from possible pain and failure. How can I change this? How can I own my right to make my own decisions when there's fear of losing what I have? Some of my physical ailments are caused by inner fear and pain I'm holding on to. How can I let that go? And how can I let go of fear or pain from past trauma? So there's a couple different things here. There's a lot of questions around letting go of fear, how to navigate it differently, and especially what to do in the moments when it's really gripping you. So let's start there. We all know what it feels like to have a moment of panic or stress or anxiety when all of a sudden it feels almost impossible to take any action or to move forward because we're so afraid of something. And more than likely, what we're afraid of is the outcome. What's going to happen if I do this? And the fact that we just can't know. We have no way of knowing. So one of the biggest practices that I use to get myself out of those moments is the use of prayers and mantras. So the show notes for these episodes will always be at wildsoulmovement.com/UW/podcast. So you can always find them there. There will be a blog roll. And depending on what episode it is, you can click on it and you'll find the show notes. I just remind you of that because anything I reference today will be over there on the blog, on the post, in the show notes. And the first thing I want to reference is a blog post that I put together, I think almost 2 years ago now, with a bunch of prayers and mantras for various situations. And the way we use these things, I think of mantras as just one short, powerful thought that you can use to switch the momentum of your thoughts. So a statement like, it is safe for me to trust, or in some moments of fear, it might just be, I am safe. Or maybe it's something like, I'm surrounded by everything I need. And the way I use those mantras is I'll literally just close my eyes, take a couple of really deep breaths, and just repeat it over and over and over again until I feel like that fear loosens its grip on me, until I can relax a bit more in my body and actually feel better. Because when we're gripped by fear, we can't focus, we're not thinking clearly, and any choice or decision or action that we take from that fear place is really not going to be the best. The outcome is probably not going to be stellar. So another great way to even make it more of an embodied practice when you do that is to place a hand over your heart and to place a hand on your belly. So, for example, if I was scared to trust someone, I could just close my eyes, take a couple deep breaths with a hand on my heart, a hand on my belly, and just repeat, it is safe for me to trust. And, for those of you who don't work from home like I do, and who might be out at a desk job or somewhere out in the real world, or maybe you're somewhere with your kids, or maybe you're in public, you might not do all those things if you don't want people to see, but you can always breathe a little deeper and you can always repeat something to yourself. So it doesn't necessarily have to be out loud. It could just be to yourself. So that's just one of the simplest ways to actually interrupt the feeling of fear and shift the momentum towards a better feeling thought, which will result in overall better feelings. And of course, so pick a mantra that addresses that as a better spin on whatever it is that you're experiencing in that moment. So that kind of covers how do I move past a moment when I'm seized in fear. So let's talk about how do I let go of the control of the outcome of things when I have so much fear. And really, anytime the word control comes up in Wild Soul Movement, this is something that we even talk about in week, I think it's maybe it's week 2 or week 3 in Wild Soul Movement. I can't remember at the moment. But the opposite of control is trust. And fairly often when we're trying to control everything, it's because we're just not trusting. We're not trusting that we're supported by the divine or the universe or whatever it is that you believe in. We're not trusting that we're supported by the people around us. And we're probably not trusting that no matter what the outcome is, we can absolutely handle it. So my way of dealing with needing to be really controlling, because that used to be a big, big thing for me. I used to be a bit of a control freak. I just had to loosen my grip on the idea that I know better. In fact, it's pretty pompous to believe that we can do things better than others all of the time. And my coach, Jessie, says, one of the greatest opportunities we have in this life is to give people the chance to have their own experience. And so that's even my word for this year was responsibility. And some people were like, hey, that sounds kind of heavy. Why would you choose responsibility? But it's about personal responsibility. Just only taking responsibility for anything that I can act on or that I can affect, and just kind of letting everyone else and everything else have their own experience. And all of my answers here are going to be a practice. It's not going to be some fix it quick tactic. That's just not how I roll, and that's just not true. And if you've ever tried behavior change that way, you know that's not how it works. It's like small incremental changes over time. So as you begin to practice these things, sometimes you'll remember, sometimes you won't. How you know you're doing a better job is you're just remembering and you're just feeling better more often than you're not. So this is about progress. It's not about perfection. And so focusing on trust, focusing on no matter what happens, I'm going to be fine and I'm going to be able to handle that. Because fairly often when we're trying to control things and we're trying to control the outcome, we're really trying to force something that doesn't want to happen and that doesn't want to be. And that's always why things don't go our way when they don't, because that's not what wants to happen. So by just trusting that whatever needs to happen is going to, and all I can ever do is my very best in any given moment, you have the opportunity to not believe in mistakes. You don't have to believe in a mistake. You just believe in, all right, well, that didn't go the way I wanted to. Boom, I need to pivot. I need to correct course. So you get to be adaptable and you get to be flexible instead of being rigid and controlling, which really causes a lot of suffering. So you get to be a bit more open-minded. So I often come from a place of fear, almost as a protection from possible pain or failure. How can I change this? It really relates a lot to what we just said. And this is one of the reasons why a core tenet of Wild Soul Movement is everything you've ever needed has always been inside of you. So many of us seek our validation outside of ourselves, and that validation often comes in the form of whatever we perceive to be success. And so in terms of failure, I kind of believe, sometimes you're going to fail, meaning you had a specific outcome you wanted and that's not what you got, so you failed. Let's not pretend you didn't fail. It's totally fine. You're going to live, but let's just acknowledge why, perhaps, if there are any immediate and obvious lessons. But if there aren't, just move on. Because the fact of the matter is, this is just the law of averages. If you want to have successes, you have to work your way through a certain number of failures. Back in the beginning of my career, when I was a sales rep for Cutco, I think they used to tell us that 60% of people were always going to say, we're going to be influenceable. 40% were always going to say yes. And then like 10% we're always going to say no. And I'm probably messing up those numbers. But the fact of the matter is that, sure, there are a certain number of things where what you do can highly influence the outcome. And there's some things that no matter how hard you try, you're never going to be able to. So just stop wasting so much energy on that. There's a great book by Byron Katie called Loving What Is. I personally love to listen to her audios. And this is one of the most incredible, healing, helpful practices I've ever engaged in is her work, is her form of inquiry, because it really helps you to just fall in love with exactly what is, because that's all you're ever going to get. And you could either rage against or resist what's actually happening, which comes in so many different forms, some of which might be illness, injury, stress, and all these other things. Or you could just accept this is exactly how it is, and how do I deal with what's right in front of my face? Be realistic about it. You can be positive about it, and you could just deal with it. And if it's not a positive situation, that's great too. Let yourself feel whatever the hell you feel, but just keep moving forward. So how can I own my right to make my own decisions when there's fear of losing what I have? Again, so now I'm going to start to sound like a broken record, and you're probably finding some themes. On the opposite side of fear is love. On the opposite side of fear is trust. And on the opposite side of fear is acceptance. So if you always believe that you're exactly where you are, surrounded by everything that you need, and the conditions are totally perfect for whatever it is that you need to be experiencing in your life so you can evolve and continue to move forward, this is going to make everything a lot easier, because even during the shittiest of times, you're going to be able to just zoom out, to take a step back a little bit and look in and say, okay, this sucks. And I can either focus on how much it sucks, which is only going to make it suck more, or I can focus on how can I get myself out of this place into something better, or into something that I actually want to be experiencing. So a lot of this is about focus. It's finding that love, finding that trust, finding that acceptance. So you know what? If your biggest fear is losing what you have, maybe you need to take risks, and maybe you need to lose what you have. I'm not saying do it on purpose, but often the thing we fear the most is the thing that we are moving towards, because we're focusing and putting so much attention on it. So you could either shift your attention away from it, or just find a way to accept that, yeah, this might happen, but I'm not going to let it get me stuck. I'm not going to let it overwhelm me. And by all means, ask for help. And that's another episode in its entirety, how to ask for help. So some of my physical ailments are caused by interfering pain I'm holding on to. How can I let that go? I mean, that is a really in-depth question with so many answers and so many modalities. Of course, there's traditional therapy. There's working with healers and coaches. Of course, I'm going to be biased and say this is something that we really move through in Wild Soul Movement. Letting go, surrender, and release is a big part of, it's actually the first module of Wild Soul Movement, because so often we can't move forward. We can't actually get what we want in its entirety without letting go of the things that hold us back. And a lot of times it's really hard for us to see our own stuff. Those are called blind spots, right? When we don't even know what's holding us back, but we know we're being held back, and it feels so hopeless and so helpless. And that's when it's really time to reach out and get some help, whether it's a group or whether it's a one-on-one. In some way, shape, or form that someone can help you. So if Wild Soul Movement is something that resonates for you, that sensual practice that combines movement with mantra and meditation that I lead in a video format for you to go through, with a journal to accompany it, and with a forum so you can have the support of like-minded people moving through a lot of similar stuff to you, or things that will support your journey as well. You can always check that out at the website, wildsoulmovement.com/how-it-works. but also there's so many resources to help you heal from whatever it is that you're holding on to. And heal is really the operative word, because in the process of letting things go, we also have to accept that they were, and we also have to be really gentle and kind with ourselves. Another great practice for this is a forgiveness practice called Ho'oponopono that I use with clients all the time. We spend a whole day doing this at my Untame Yourself weekends, and I have a YouTube video. I'll make sure to link to that in the show notes. But if you just go to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Liz DiAlto, and you search for forgiveness, or you look for the word Ho'oponopono, you'll find the video. It's been up there for several months now. So same thing goes for letting go of fear and pain from past trauma. And I do want to put a caveat in here. If there's varying degrees, there's a spectrum of trauma. And, for some of us who are super fortunate to never have been physically or sexually abused in any way, shape, or form, our trauma might not be as deep, but who knows? There's really no hierarchy of trauma. But I do highly encourage you to check out all kinds of different modalities, and for sure, work with someone you trust and work with someone who's a professional, because a lot of trauma is really tricky. A lot of wounding that comes with traumatic experiences can just be reopened over and over and over again until it's properly addressed and properly healed. So depending on what kind of trauma you have experienced that is now causing you fears, the fear is just the symptom. If the cause is the trauma, if the cause is still holding on to something that has happened in the past, you definitely want to get some professional help to take care of that, because going at it alone can just layer on more problems, because then you might beat yourself up. Why isn't this working? What's wrong with me? I'm broken. I'm damaged. And you're not. You just need some proper and appropriate attention, help, healing, and care to get through these things. And so then, how do you get past the fear of not being good enough? And again, this is something, broken record, that we totally go through a whole module in Wild Soul Movement around being enough, about opening ourselves up to trust and receive. In fact, one of our mantras is, I am open, I am enough. And in the journal that accompanies Wild Soul Movement, there's some really great prompts and questions to help you identify where that belief even comes from. Because if it's insidious and if it's deep enough, then to not get to the root is probably the reason why you're still feeling this way. Even, if you've read the books, you've gone to workshops or whatever, maybe you've done a little bit of coaching, but until you get to the root of the issue of why it is that you believe you're not enough, sometimes it's impossible to let go of that. And again, everyone is different. So you probably have noticed by now, if you've been listening to the show for a while, or even if you've only been listening to this episode and this is the first time you've ever really met me, that a lot of my answers are going to be around trial and error. You've got to try things out for yourself. You've got to feel things through your own body. You've got to have your own experiences to decide what works for you and what doesn't. Because I can give you tons of advice. I can give you a lot of personal examples. And we are unique humans. Our experiences are different. And how we interpret things, how we use things, and the usefulness and the benefits that we get from experiences and the results will absolutely differ based on everything in our lives leading up to the moment when you decide to take action or follow my advice or whatever. So keep that in mind, and always, always, always just be super gentle with yourself. Just remember, if something doesn't work, it doesn't necessarily mean there's something wrong with you. It just means perhaps that was not the approach for you. And there's no shortage of approaches in the world. So fear of not being good enough sometimes just requires putting yourself out for something you don't think you're good enough, because sometimes we're never going to believe we are until we prove ourselves that we are. And if you have this belief that you're not good enough, more than likely you're probably attracting situations to continuously prove you right. So a great way to look at it is to start finding experiences to prove to you that you are absolutely enough, and start with small things. Okay. It doesn't have to be like these big sweeping crazy things like asking for a big raise or quitting a job and starting a business. It could be It could be little stuff. It could just be asking someone to help you with something. And when they say yes, you just take that as proof and celebrate like, yes, I am worthy of help. I am worthy of people saying yes to me. So I think that's a really solid place to end this conversation for now. I'm sure we'll have follow-up episodes. I'm sure we'll have follow-up questions on the topic of fear and limiting beliefs. So again, if you have any questions you want me to answer, you can email us at hello@wildsoulmovement.com for plenty of information, advice, resources that I don't necessarily share in the podcast. Definitely go to wildsoulmovement.com and you can enter your name and email over there so you get all kinds of updates, invitations, get introductions. Get introductions to really amazing and powerful friends of mine sometimes that might have something that you need or that you love. And again, if you have any interest in speeding up the process of implementing or integrating any of this advice, I have plenty of ways that I'm available to serve you. So check out wildsoulmovement.com/offerings. That wraps up this Ask Liz episode, and I will speak to you and see some of you who are tuning in from video in the next one.
What's true in a woman, there is nothing wrong ever to begin with.
Yeah.
Everything that's perceived as wrong is perceived on rejection or perceived rejection even of who we are. But who we are underneath is complete goodness.
Yeah.
And very deeply feminine and very wild and very wise.